This is The Second Studio, hosted by the Architecture and Design Office fame. My name is David Lee, and with me is Marina Bordero. The two of us are partners at the office and, of course, hosts of the show, and today our guest is Noah Walker.
Noah is the principal and founder of Walker Workshop, a design-build firm based in Los Angeles.
Yes, and with Noah, we talk about his life story, and we talk about his office, design-build, the benefits of design-build. We talk about his philosophy in architecture, his design process. We cover everything. This recording, to me, it felt like 3 hours packed into an hour and a half. At the same time, I feel like we could have kept talking for another 3 hours as well. We even talked about work-life balance at the end. It's all over the place. I think you guys are really going to enjoy it. If you don't know his work already, then you should definitely look it up or watch the video, watch this recording and interview on YouTube. And on there, you'll see Noah and you'll see some images of his work as well. Sponsors.
Would you like to get as-built faster?
Yes.
Okay. IPX has you covered. IPX lets you seamlessly transform laser scans into LOD300 BIM and CAD files. Whether you've got your 3D scans already or need the full laser scanning service, IPX offers instant pricing and order tracking for scan-to-BIM services on any project, no matter the size or complexity. Once a building scan is complete, IPX delivers detailed BIM, CAD, 360 virtual tours, and material takeoffs in their platform, where you can view, share, export, query, and quantify areas, floors, and materials. Check out the IPX link in our show notes.
Designers and architects, if you're looking for a powerful, real-time visualization and VR tool, then check out Enscape. Enscape is super easy to use because it's a plugin and not a standalone application, which means you can directly work in your SketchUp, ArchiCAD, Rhino, Vectorworks, or Revit model. In fact, it only takes a couple of clicks from installation to creating your first rendering. Enscape does realistic renderings, 360-degree panoramas and videos, and virtual reality environments. We use Enscape in our office, we love it, and we think you will too. So click the Enscape 3D link in our show notes to learn more. Revit users, you have access to a powerful new capability you might not know about. Available with Revit version 2023.1 onward, Autodesk Insight is a next-generation carbon analysis tool that can help you make the leap toward low-carbon design. With only a few clicks, Insight lets you analyze, understand, and track the embodied and operational carbon impact of your design choices. You can then visualize opportunities for energy efficiency and carbon mitigation with its flexible dashboards, helping you make more sustainable and informed decisions. Check out the Insight link in our show notes to learn more. This is The Second Studio with myself, Marina, and our guest, Noah. Here we go.
I lived in a lot of places growing up. I think my father was a traveling minister. And so I think, up until college, I probably lived in 15 or 16 homes around the country. And so
wow.
I don't really have a singular place that I called home. Instead, I got to move around a lot and live in different cities and different places and, probably experience different lifestyles, I guess, in parts of the country. But I was born out here in California, in Santa Barbara, and then sort of made my way east over the years. Spent a long time in Colorado, and then some time in Virginia, Pennsylvania. I went to a boarding school in Philadelphia, a Quaker boarding school, which was actually, I think, probably a formative experience in a lot of ways too.
What is a Quaker boarding school like?
Yeah, it's great. It's, you go to, in terms of religion, you go to a meeting for worship, which is their sort of religious service, twice a week. And what's really interesting about it is that you sit down in silence for 45 minutes or so, almost you can meditate, you can just think about your day, you can think about religion if you want, but it's not necessarily a religious thing. And then, every once in a while, if somebody is moved to share something about their life or their sort of insight, then people stand up and talk a little bit. So that can be a pretty interesting experience. But one of the tenets of Quakerism too is sort of simplicity and light, and also a certain amount of humility too. So I think even though I'm not like a practicing Quaker these days, I kind of carry some of those tenets through even into architecture. And then, I think I didn't think I was going to be an architect. I really discovered architecture more in college, and started by taking I think I had a really great college professor that taught architectural history. And so that was my first foray into architecture. And I was like, oh, this is really cool stuff. Maybe I'll take a studio class and stuff like that. But I thought I was going to be an English major.
An English major, really?
Yeah, I was going to be an English major. And at the college I was at, it didn't quite click with me, and I was having so much fun in these architectural history courses. I ended up switching my major to it's at Bryn Mawr College, which is historically an all women's school. But if you go to Haverford College, which is right down the street, you can take courses and major there at Bryn Mawr. So I did a major in growth and structure of cities at Bryn Mawr, and so I took some architectural studio classes, and actually went to London for the semester abroad at the Bartlett School of Architecture in London. That was a really amazing experience too. So definitely was able to transition into architecture pretty well.
Yeah, that's interesting. Did you say that I'm assuming we're talking about your undergraduate career and degree, right?
Yeah, undergraduate.
Did you say your major was growth of cities or something?
The growth and structure of cities is the title of the major, and sort of like a catch-all for urban planning, anthropology. A lot of people that go on to become planners are in that program, or historians, but also some architects, because there's architectural studios and architectural history courses that are part of that major too. Yeah. So in a way, it's like pre-architecture. I took studio for a couple of years there, and I think the architecture studio in London was definitely architecture. That's sort of a really interesting school, and so it was great to really get that first dose of an architectural education when I was there.
I've never heard of the growth and structure or whatever it was of cities as a major, but it sounds so cool. So like, you said you have studios as part of that major, like urban design studios or architecture studios?
Architecture studios, architecture studios as part of it. So do a typical studio as well. Just they would be like a brief, and you design a project for a few weeks, and then like a crit, like any other architecture school in those studios. And obviously there'd be a fair smattering of studio arts and things like that too, sculpture, painting, and stuff that would contribute to the major. So I think it was actually really great preparation for wanting to get into architecture. And then after leaving Haverford, I lived in Philadelphia for a few years and worked in an architecture firm. But my first job out of college was actually in a cabinet shop.
Oh.
I was because I was really interested in also just craft and making things, and so I did a short stint building basically cabinets, learning how they're constructed and things like that, which was great. Sort of a great sort of exposure to the making of things that definitely had an influence on me later too, in terms of the path that I took, right? Moving into architecture. And then after about 3 years working in Philadelphia, I decided to go back to grad school. So I went up to the GSD for 4 years and got the more traditional architectural education up there, my master's degree. So
yeah. You were in the trays, I assume.
Yeah, exactly. The trays, beer and dogs on Fridays.
Yeah. I always have to ask, so where were you situated in the trays? Were you deep underneath them, or were you lucky enough to be the one to see sky?
That's a good point. I think every time I was seeing sky. Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. I think that was good. Yeah, I haven't been back there in ages, but maybe I think they've changed some things, but they probably still have the trays, right? So, and I think generally it was an awesome education. I think it was, everybody's working really hard, and you get all these really exciting teachers coming in that can really shape and influence you, and the lectures and everything like that. And plus, you're in that. Obviously, the Boston educational environment's really exciting to begin with. Yeah. So it was a good place to go to school.
So so why did you decide to go back to school for architecture for a master? Did you felt like you needed to dig into architecture a bit more before?
Yeah. By that point, I knew I wanted to be an architect, and I think I had a basically BA. So I think the BA isn't going to get you it won't easily get you a professional license eventually. And that, I think that was the main reason why to go back to school and really kind of cement that sort of education.
Yeah. So another question is, so, you're studying cities, and as you said, it's a really broad topic, obviously. You cover a lot of different stuff, which makes it very fascinating. And there's a lot of different avenues one could pursue from your BA degree, it seems like. What was it about architecture that drew you toward that as opposed to becoming an urban planner or a city planner or something more on that scale?
I think it was the studio classes, which I really enjoyed the most. And when I had that opportunity to go to London and study, I think this Peter Cook, who's like a famous like theoretical architect, was the head of the school there, and just like every week he would do just sort of like a lunch lecture, and like the auditorium would be flooded with students that were just really fascinated by what he had to say, and there was just like a really incredible energy to the place. And I think I loved it. I loved studio classes. I loved making things. And at that time it was drawing, or making models and things like that, which was really fun. So kind of took that bug with me, and I was like, yeah, I want to be an architect after that experience.
Yeah, it's pretty intoxicating. Yeah. Do you find that kind of atmosphere and that way of working, I mean, now things are much more digital, but the essence of what you experience is something that you are able to have in your profession, in your studio? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, the studio nowadays is I'd say 100% digital, which is kind of interesting in terms of the way we design. But I try to think of it as not being kind of lost in that digital medium, because it eventually has to get out and become a real product anyway. And I think that's been one of the big sort of emphasis of the office, is that, in a way to continue the story, I think, I developed after GSD a real interest in design build. I worked for a couple, moved to New York after GSD and worked for a couple architects that did traditional architecture while I was there, sort of design bid build method of delivery, we call it.
Yeah.
But and it was fun, but there was sort of a little bit less satisfying, because I think, as that is often the case, projects go on hold and you don't ever get to see anything actually get made.
Yeah.
And so it's like, after a few years of working, I was like, to date, I had still not seen anything get built. Right. And I was like, well, at some point I'd really like to see that. So I had a friend that was working at Peter Gluck's office, which is a great, East Coast firm that does design build exclusively. And, I asked for a job there and was hired, and had a couple of years of real experience there. I think you've had him on the show too.
Yeah.
He has a great education, and, he really, taught me that architects can take on a lot of responsibility and control over their projects in ways that I didn't quite know beforehand. Right. So I've always had an interest in design build and construction moving forward. And then, eventually decided to come out to LA, and worked in LA for a residential firm for a couple of years here. And it was also a design build firm, but they did a mixture of projects, like I do now. And then I think 2008 happened, right? Which was the last Great Recession. And I had come with this dream of doing prefab homes. Kind of lured me out to Los Angeles, because I was like, oh, this is a really cool method of delivery of homes, and it's exciting and it's fresh and stuff like that. And that prefab operation was really cool, but it just didn't make it through the recession in a way, right? Yeah. The factory shuttered, and at some point I got a call from a friend in high school that I had, and he was like, hey, I just bought a house. Would you be interested in like remodeling it for me? And I said, sure. I just jumped off the bus and just dove into like a really humble, really small remodel project for about a year during the recession. And that was pretty awesome. That was really fun.
Wow.
So what was the project like? I mean, like how many square feet? Like describe it for us.
I think it was an 1,800 square foot, 1-story bungalow, right? Project.
Nice.
And we kind of gutted it and added a swimming pool and stuff in the back. And, did the design build thing on that project where, for that was really cool because I was the only one there, right? So I was doing, as a superintendent, sometimes the craftsman, although I obviously worked with subs and sort of managed the project, the design and everything. So that was a really great sort of experience and a sense that you can do this kind of out on your own. And I think from there it did lead to other work. I think I picked up another house that through a contact, and then it just sort of kind of snowballed from there. But the emphasis in the beginning really was, I thought that, probably those initial projects were all design build, that I thought that was going to be the road to go down. Essentially was to probably do, one or two projects at a time and control everything and do the construction and the design and maybe even do some fabrication work. And that was the original sort of business model when I started Walker Workshop, which I think at this point was about 14 years ago. And it was really fun. I had a Honda Civic. One of the problems I had was like how many 2x4s can you fit in a Honda Civic? I mean, that was when you go to Home Depot. Yeah, that was one of my challenges, right? Because it was like literally doing everything. So, but it was a great experience. I wouldn't trade it for anything, and it really is what got the office started. And then, after that, I think, you say if there was like a big break, I guess, for the office, I guess everybody has a break, right? It was that project that I did at Oak Pass, which was maybe the third project that I did, but it was a significantly bigger sort of undertaking than the other ones. And that was also design build, which was big and scary. And but I met the client at a dinner party, and I remember he hadn't had he was looking for land, but hadn't purchased anything yet at the time. And I think he asked a riddle of everybody at the dinner party, and I was able to answer the riddle. And I think it's just like sort of a logic problem or something like that. But I think because I could answer the riddle, he thought I was like a good guy and smart guy, and sort of.
Okay, what was the riddle? What was the riddle?
I wish I could remember the riddle, but I don't. And it was just a sort of a logic puzzle, and so then he's like, okay, Noah's smart, and so we endeavored with him to sort of, even early in the process, I remember just looking at lots with him. He would call me up and say, let's go look at this lot, and so and so, and we'd walk the lot and talk about it and stuff like that. I think it took maybe 3 trips to locate this property in Oak Pass that he eventually bought, and then it became like a 4-year or so journey to develop that property with him.
How large was that project for the folks who don't know?
It's about 10,000 square feet. So it's about a 3.5 acre property. It had 2 homes on it when we started. It had an old barn, and the main house had burned down. And so it was just a burnt out shell of what it was. And so it had to be removed. And as you know, in LA, the oak trees are really sacred objects in terms of planning, right? And so a property like that has, I think it has about 130 trees that we had to navigate around, and so that became one of like the big drivers of placement of the house, but also I think wanting to do a house that didn't overpower the land either. I think that. So that led to the idea, it was a beautiful ridgeline site with these majestic oaks, wanting not to ruin that experience of coming into the property. It felt really incredible, sort of natural enclave. And so, we decided to bury most of the house underground. Probably 2/3 of the house is sort of built into the hill, and then under a green roof, and then there's a very small sort of living space up above that's maybe 2,000 square feet or so. So it doesn't have the effect of being a 8,000, 10,000 square foot house on the land.
Yeah.
Which was great, and everything was structural concrete, so we were able to do some architectural concrete and things like that. And I guess what was interesting though is like towards the end of the project, maybe like we're 80% finished. Nathan, who became a great friend of mine over the years too, and we're doing another house for him now, said, I'm going to sell the house. It's it's too big. He was a single guy. It was a handful, right? Like maintaining and living in a 10,000 square foot house is like, and so it just sort of the gears shifted at that point, like, listing the house, and suddenly you get like a flood of real estate agents, that come through, right, and want to list the house, and I remember I sort of walked one of them through, to give them a tour and talk to them about it, and they said, this house is going to change your life. Your life is not going to be the same. It's like writing a hit show or something like that, which I thought was really interesting, and it's probably the case. I think that really is one of the great ways to get a break, is if you do a great house and it does go up for sale, there's like a marketing engine that kind of takes over, right? And so, I was able to meet a lot of really cool celebrities that were interested in the house and that sort of thing. And a bunch of people that maybe could afford, let's say, a $20 million house, but for whatever reason didn't like the location or something about the house, ended up reaching out later, right? So it was a great exposure to like a great cohort of people that sort of led to like the next era of Walker Workshop projects for years to come. Yeah.
That's pretty cool, because I feel like oftentimes, like, we get, like, as we design like houses, we get attached to them because we get to know them so well, and we design them for specific users, and then if the client's like, I'm gonna sell it, you're kind of bummed. You're like, hey man, like, we did all this work, we did all of that together, and now you're walking away from it. But it's interesting to think about it in that way, kind of like the lineage of the house, and who's going to take it on, and how does that impact the story and the history of the firm who's worked on it. I think it's fascinating.
It's a good lesson, I guess you could say, because we had another guest on, and the same thing happened for them.
Yeah.
I think the house that they were commissioned to do was to be a spec house from the beginning, to be sold. And he did it pretty early on in his career. There was a bunch of open houses and marketing and all that stuff, and it basically took him to, as you just said it, to the next phase, the next chapter in his offices and his professional career because of that project. And it's tough with houses. The biggest thing with houses, especially when you work with folks like you do, is there's NDAs, and even if there's not an NDA, no one ever sees the house really up close because it's a house. It's someone's private home. And it's one of the aspects of houses that can be a little bit frustrating for architects, because you want people to see your work, and you want everyone to experience it too. That's part of the fun of it, is to like, come see what I built, but you can't unless you're friends with LeBron James or whatever it is.
It can be frustrating for sure. Like, I think it's the only art that I can think of, unless you guys can think of something where that potential exists. Like, if you're a painter or a musician, it's going to get out in the world, right?
Yeah.
And people are going to get in, but you could create like you create your masterpiece, like your great album, and then the studio's like, oh, this is great, but we're only going to show it to our closest friends. So and then there's this strange feeling, it's sort of, and a lot of homes you end up saying goodbye to, because that you're never going to access again, and that's happened to me a couple times. I think, let's say Oak Pass, it got great publicity. I think we won some awards, like House of the Year or something like that, and some AI awards, which was great at the time. And then it led to like maybe 3 or 4 other big projects that led to the Carla Rich project and Mandeville and stuff like that. It happened again at Mandeville. It's kind of interesting story. It was an end user house that, at the end of the project, the owners were lovely people, were just like, we're going to sell a house. It's like, oh, great, here we go again. So which is great for me too, though, because it gets you a chance to get that sort of high level exposure. To people that can afford the house, and so that one was also a great experience, and the new owner's really great and really cordial, and it's been actually really joy. It's a joy to see new owners come into homes and really appreciate them and love them, and be very thankful for what you've done. Even though they weren't your direct client, and that's been cool. Like Oak Pass now is on its onto its third owner, and those owners are lovely too, and we've done some improvements for them from time to time and stuff like that. So it's been really great to see that, you know, sometimes the homes live on and you actually can maintain a relationship with them too.
Yeah.
So going back in the timeline, how many projects had you done? How long had your office been around prior to this Oak Ridge house, the 10,000 square foot Oak Pass? Sorry.
Yeah. I think I had done 2 projects. At that point, I'd done. So it was really all about the riddle, right? It wasn't about like the portfolio.
That's
or
amazing.
Like that. And it was a big leap of faith, and I certainly learned a lot on that project. I didn't have an architectural license for a long time. You know, I just sort of put it off like a lot of people do.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting story too, an anecdotal story. So I figured I could get my contractor's license first, which is a much easier license to get in California. You only sit for one test, and you know, design build as a term isn't really a protected term, so anybody can use it.
Yep.
And so I was a licensed GC that did design build for a long time, but I did, you know, after the Oak Pass house and the publicity, I got the attention of the California Architects Board, and they sent me a letter in the mail, and I was like, oh my God, what is this? They say I'm calling myself an architect, and they asked for, you know, my business card and my title blocks and stuff like that, which, you know, don't say architecture on them anywhere, or the website at the time.
Smart.
And so, but I got the investigator on the phone. I said, so what's going on here? And it really was about the media calling me an architect. So I had to send, you know, letters to everybody telling them to stop. Basically, it was like, I had to send a letter to the LA Times and to Dwell. And like, I know you guys call me an architect, but I'm not an architect. So could you please stop? And that was it. And then they concluded the investigation. They said, okay, you're fine, but, you know, just be careful. You know,
just be careful.
The Architects Board. So, and then I was like, okay, that's it. I'm going to go get my license. So like, you know, 6 months later, I finished my exams and was able to move on from that phase. But it was, you know, kind of interesting, you know, that you could run afoul of the authorities, you know, practicing architecture and not being licensed. So.
Yeah, the CAB is not an organization to mess with, and they can be
totally
petty at times.
We should have them on the show.
Yeah, I don't want to.
I remember asking the investigator, I said, so, you know, Renzo Piano is building this great museum right at the time, and like everybody's calling him an architect. He's not licensed in the United States. And he's like, that's a problem. Really, they shouldn't call him an architect. I was like, okay.
Yeah,
great.
But you, sir.
You just have to keep getting published everywhere, and at some point, just stop.
Yeah, exactly. You can't be avoided.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I was actually told of years ago by sort of an architect's mentor person that I knew. When I came back to California to start our practice, he was like, be aware of the CAB. Like, they like to go after the smaller folks because they can. Yeah. They can't go after Renzo Piano. Like, what are they going to do?
Exactly.
But yeah. That's a huge jump in project scales. And you said that it was also design build.
It was. That was probably the biggest project that we did design build as a GC. And so it was wild. I mean, it was just sort of like a very small office. I think there were 3 of us. Everybody was really talented and driven to perform, and we just learned a lot of learning on the job. I do think architecture is one of those professions, and construction, where you kind of have to have a level of fearlessness, because if you're too afraid to execute and do stuff, then you just won't be able to move, right? There's just so much risk involved along the way that you kind of just have to dive in and have a willingness to kind of learn in the process and do a lot of sort of understanding and research if you need to and stuff like that, and testing, but because it is so complex. Certainly.
Yeah, that's a good point. It also reminds me, we had someone on the show, an architect, who we were talking with them about what was the conversation? It was sort of with what you're saying, but also I think, how do clients perceive architects? And one of the things he stated was, he tells clients when, let's say, they need some convincing, he's like, you're not really hiring me just to do what I've done before. You're hiring me because you trust that I can solve things that I haven't done before, which is what I did for all those past projects. All the past projects you see, like X percentage of it, I don't know I've never done that before. Like I figured it out, and that's actually what I'm going to be doing for every project, and that's what you want from me. Which makes sense. I can also, now that I say it out loud, see from a client's perspective, that's a sort of a risky proposition. But it goes back actually to your story about the riddle or whatever it was, right? It's probably more about trusting the person. I mean, that's pretty extreme still, but
Yeah. No, I definitely I agree with that, and I think one of the things that would probably disappoint me, moving forward in the career too, I guess I would probably say I'm probably mid-career architect at this point, right? Is repetition. I think one of the great joys of doing what we do in architecture is that like a level of inventiveness that you can bring to every project, and really trying to make each project have a unique, sort of really unique magical quality that is hopefully different on every project. I feel like I would, like, if I start doing projects that are cookie cutter copies of the last, and I would be a little disappointed in myself too, right? Because I think that part of the joy of architecture is the inventiveness and being able to really find something that's really special and uniquely tailored to all of those constraints that we deal with, whether they're sort of client driven or landscape driven or code driven, city driven constraints that we have to deal with. It's one of the things that makes the profession so interesting and rewarding when you get through it all and get it right. Is just the level of limitation and constraint that you have to navigate to create something really, at the end of the day, that is hopefully a work of art is really rare. I think if you're a painter or a sculptor or do some other kind of art, you don't have as many limits in front of you. So it's that sort of navigation that can be really, really fun. It can be exhausting, but it can be a joy to get right too.
Yeah.
And I feel like it must be especially more complex if you are doing a design build, because there's one thing about just designing projects and designing them in different ways every time, and then there is the building part. And one would think that maybe if you're in design build office, you kind of want efficiency and process and some sort of repetition, just so the machine is well oiled. But it seems like you're kind of like going in the opposite direction, which in a way maybe is more of a craftsman approach to building architecture rather than like a manufactured approach to building architecture. But I'm curious, like, how do you maintain that the creativity and the variety in the design while trying to be a design build office?
That's a great point, and I think after Oak Pass 2, there was a fork in the road in terms of the kind of work that we were getting and picking up. I sort of decided I didn't want to become just a construction company. I felt like once the size of homes gets up into like the ultra big, like 20,000, 15,000 square feet, and the cost of construction gets like museum-like, I felt like I would have to have so much construction staff and like the burden of building would be so great that I started to say, well, we're not just a design build firm. In fact, we're mostly an architecture firm at this point. And start to really draw some lines about what we build and what we don't. And one really easy line to draw was that we don't build any spec homes, just because it didn't seem like it was in our best interest to, and like there would be conflicts of interest involved with us, trying to do that. And so we don't build anybody else's spec homes, although maybe someday we'd like to do our own. And then the other line is just sort of at size. I feel like in order for us to stay like an architecture design first office, which we are, that we can't do too many big projects in construction at once. And so these days we really pick and choose our projects that are design build. And I'd say we're really tooled to build one or two small houses at a time. I think we have basically two going at a time, and they tend to be on the small side. Like, I don't think I would be super excited about building anything over 10,000 square feet, just because it does, like, it just balloons, like the amount of construction effort you have to put into a project balloons, and it becomes a very different animal, right? So.
I was going to say, so what, these scales of 10,000 square feet, 20,000 square feet is for most people giant. So what constitutes small?
Yeah.
You said 1 to 2 small projects per year that you do design build and you build. We're talking about like 8,000 square feet? Or...
Yeah, we're building one in Santa Monica right now that is about, I think it's about 5,000 square feet. So that's a good size for us. I think that the biggest we've built is 10,000. That felt big. Yeah. And we have some cool ones coming up. We're doing design build on a historic remodel project that's only like 2,000 square feet next year, for example. Cool. So that's a totally new hat for us to wear, right? We don't do a lot of remodeling. We've done a couple projects where we've done remodel additions and they've been fun, but like to really get into something that's sort of historic and has pedigree and stuff like that, and approach the project more as a student, trying not to tear down what the master has done and really just trying to make it better and improve it. And then has been a great lesson. I think it's going to be a good exercise for us.
That's awesome.
And now a little break for our show sponsors. I used to start remodeling projects with hours of tedious measuring and recreating the existing conditions. And then I discovered Canvas, which is an iPad app and iPhone app that lets me easily scan entire homes in minutes and automatically generates editable models in format like SketchUp, ArchiCAD, Vectorworks, Revit, and more in as little as 1 day. Get to the design phase faster with Canvas. Visit canvas.io/SSP to schedule your demo and to get your first as-built free. Managing design projects and specifications can be challenging, but Programma makes it effortless. Trusted by top interior design firms in over 75 countries, it's the world's most elegant software for interior designers. With its suite of powerful tools, you will experience smoother client interactions with less back and forth, saving you hours of admin work and making your job more enjoyable. Stop struggling and start thriving with the seriously powerful Programma. Click the link in our show notes and get 25% off an annual subscription with code SECONDSTUDIO at checkout. You will wonder how you ever worked without it.
So, what percentage of the work or the projects is design build versus you guys just being the architect and designer?
I'd probably say about 20% or so is design build. Yeah.
So then I guess the other thing folks might be wondering is why continue doing design build at all? Because you seem to be, obviously you're very successful with purely the architecture side. So why not just pursue that 100% of the time?
I think it keeps Office honest to a certain extent. And I don't mean honest like from like a moral standpoint, but honest in terms of the way we approach projects. I've always felt like when we design, I want to design like we're going to have to build a thing, and I think it kind of creates like an ethic about making and construction. Like we kind of try to keep this aligned even with our just design projects, where maybe we have to build this. Let's figure it out basically in a way that we can execute. And so I see that happen a lot with architects that aren't as connected to making, that there is sort of a gap between what they're envisioning and then what actually has to happen to create a project or create the design. A lot of translation takes place, right? Sometimes it's an impossible road. And so feeling like that, it's like kind of like a grounding for the office, being grounded in the fact that we're still making things and constructing, I think is kind of important to the office's philosophy or identity, that I don't want to give it up. But I do think that the ones that we've built can stand on their own and have been really beautiful, magical homes. And so I do think that there's a real sort of enjoyable element to doing them. I think that there's a sense of reward when you show up and you're like, not only did we design this place, but we also created it. And it's also fun because there's like a level of fluidity that you have in design build that I don't see normally with builders. It's just you can pivot pretty quickly. You can make changes on the fly and create mock-ups and things like that in ways that like builders would grumble about often. So that's fun too. Oftentimes the design build projects kind of flex. Like and sometimes you just see stuff. Like I remember at the Oak Pass project, I was walking around one day, the shadow play on the garage was really nice. It was wrapped in that white plastic, but I was like, wouldn't that be cool if that was like the garage door, and so went back to the office and we sort of digitized some like the oak shadows onto like a water jet cut garage door system, and those sorts of like magical sort of spontaneous moments of design that only happen if you're there in the field, right? If you're in the office, you're never going to see it.
Yeah.
And so it was great. I mean, we wanted to do like something cool. It was like a 3-car garage door, and we wanted to do like Schweiss is this company that makes like aircraft hangar doors, right? So you can get like a really wide span in the door. It opens. It's like a horizontal bifold door with a winch, basically. So it's a very unusual garage door, and nobody would put it in for us. Like we called all these garage door installers. They're like, what are you guys doing? Like, this is not a garage door, you know? And so, we one day we had to we rented a Great All on a Saturday, from Sunbelt Rentals, and we 3 architects, just installed the garage door. We did it ourselves. We're like, okay, if nobody's going to do it for us, we're gonna have to do it ourselves, kind of mentality. And so we installed the garage door, and it was great. It was one of my favorite moments in the project, but those sorts of things come up when you do design build, and they're really fun experiences, and I think they add sort of a richness to the projects too, which I think is really special.
That's so cool. I mean, honestly, the design build model is something we're super fascinated with. Yeah. And it's a funny thing because this recording will probably come out a few months from today's date.
Okay.
But relative to where we are now in the real world, we had released an episode a few weeks ago about the problems with quote design build, namely mostly because most design build companies are not actually design build companies. They are what Peter Gluck would say they are build design with the lowercase d companies.
Yeah.
But the fluidity of working, it makes complete sense. I'm just super fascinated because I feel like you don't see many architect-led design build companies, and then second to that, also you don't find many design build companies who but then also practice as traditional architects working in the traditional design bid builds or pre-con route with contractors. But you guys are doing both. Yeah. So I guess one of the questions is it hard to have those two sides in the office, because they seem like the working track and process is potentially very, very different between one and the other. Do the teams bleed over between the sides? Is it hard to have people go from design build to the traditional route?
I think that they do bleed. Yeah. And like Peter's mentality, which I carried over to my office, Peter Gluck's, was really want the architects to be involved with the construction process. So we usually, if it is a design build project, then there's an architect that's managing even the construction usually, which is a great experience and a great education too, for architects to do. And so that's one way. I mean, also trying to keep the walls down between offices. Like I think there's a tendency, I've seen it in other firms too, to compartmentalize and put construction in one part of the building and architecture in the other, and the two never meet, which I think is the wrong approach too. So we try to keep the dialogue and flow going back and forth between the architects and in truth, the people that are true construction personnel in the office. I only have a couple of those, and for the most part, architects can lean into those construction positions too. So we do a fair amount of that, but I, and like I mentioned before, I think having that aspect of construction in the office does lead into even our architectural projects that aren't design build, and it kind of creates a consistency. I feel like even for the stuff that we know from day one that we're not going to build, like now we have a couple international projects, and they've been really, really fun experiences to even just get out of the United States and do something has been really kind of eye-opening too, just in terms of way people build and construction typologies and things like that. So, and obviously we're not going to, I don't even think, that's one thing about contracting, is that it's so local, right? I think it would be hard for us even to do design build or to do contracting outside of the LA area, just to a large extent, right? And even LA is so big that like you're pulling different subcontractors don't want to go one way or the other. If you're in the South Bay, for example, those guys will not leave the South Bay, right? And so LA is like 5 or 6 cities, combined. So
that's a good, that it really actually practically is more that than it is one city in terms of getting around. How large is your office in terms of like how many people, and do you have, is all of the construction work subbed out, or do you have people who are on payroll for that and not just supervisors?
Yeah, so our office, I think, is about 23 people in total, and probably 15 architects, and then some support staff. And I say in terms of real construction personnel right now, we have four people that really specialize in construction.
Wow.
And amongst those, we have one of them is a pure tradesperson. Okay. So that's somebody that can, is really good with equipment and hammers and can pick up, because there's pieces of the puzzle that fall through the cracks in terms of, well, who's doing that? Everybody points in the opposite direction. Like, okay, fine, we'll do it.
So everyone points to him.
Yeah, exactly. So we have that guy, and in the past we have done more fabrication work. It's something that we'd really like to bring back at some point. We grew so fast now, in our space that we've been in for 8 years, that we don't really have any space left. And so, but in the past we have done some fabrication work, in-house, and have had really good sort of craftsmen and stuff like that over the years too. And it would be great, like if the opportunity arises to bring that in. Like, we've built wood screens, and obviously the more fun stuff, the stuff that you see, decorative elements and stuff like that is really fun to engage in. And we have it is called Walker Workshop. We have a small shop in the back, with power tools and things like that we can use. I like to keep that mentality that we're always like in the spirit of making and creating here. So it's something that I hopefully will drive us into the future.
I have to say, I think your description of the office and what you're doing is probably of great interest to many architects. I think for a lot of architects, they have all the interests you've described, but they aren't able to find a career path, let's call it, that allows them to do what you're doing, because it's hard, right? So most people end up working at a traditional architecture office. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, of course, or they end up going just the contractor route, or whatever other things that we've talked about. But you've managed to so far quite successfully have everything underneath one roof. Do you have any plans on growing the business and taking on more projects and increasing the number of people, or do you feel like
that's a good question too, and I think it's been a struggle over the years to really kind of find that right number of people and the right balance. Even physically right now, we can't really grow. So we're moving soon, hopefully, into a bigger building. We're in escrow for a building of our own, which will be a really exciting kind of process of creating a space that is more reflective of what we do as well. And so that will give us a chance to grow. But I'm always torn, because I feel like on some level, like the level of dilution that you go through as you become a bigger firm, I guess what I mean by that is kind of creative dilution. Is it can get really pronounced to the point where it's like it doesn't feel like it's the same product anymore. And for me personally, I feel like that probably taps out around 30 people, and that might even be a little bit big. And so, and that's one of the issues that I've had over the years, is like when you're an architecture firm that's really based on a person to a large extent, there's a lot of strain on me oftentimes to, like, I have to be at every client meeting, for example. And if I'm not there, if it looks like I've given passed the project off to another person in the office, sometimes I get a phone call. It's like the "we hired you" kind of call, right? And so then it really has to do with like the dilution of principal time and the scaling of that in a way that is effective. So it sort of becomes a trap, right? When you start to brand yourself based on a personality or my name, versus a more generic sort of way of working. But I'm trying to discover ways to teach systems in the office so that people can understand the way we make things and create, and certainly like the design process in the office now is very multi-directional, I would say. We expect project teams to come up with ideas at the onset, and I'm going to come up with ideas, and we're going to meet in the middle somewhere often. And so that can be a fun process too.
So talking about the design process, so how does that work for you? I mean, I don't think I've ever asked this question, but do you have a design process? Like, what is the process?
Yeah, I think we do. I think we have a design process. Is interesting. The design process. I mean, it starts with, I try not to think about anything visual in the beginning, quite honestly. And sometimes I'll go to an interview or meet with a potential client. They'll be like, "So what do you think?" And I'm like, "I have no idea." And I think that that's really on purpose because
Yeah.
I think that we really want to do some exploration in the beginning, and so we take a really close look at obviously at programmatic requirements and interview the clients and get really understanding of what the sort of machine that we're creating for them needs to be, and then it becomes an overlay of all the other restrictions on the property, whether it's a hillside lot, views, light, trees, location, all of that, and then zoning, of course. And then once you have that, you sort of the rules of by which you're going to play the game, then it becomes a sort of an experiment in ideas, really, and trying to formulate projects that have kind of like a conceptual direction, if possible. I think that it's important to have some sort of concept when you're doing a project because that can carry you through it, and we really try to kind of maintain ideas through projects, even if they're subtle. But I think that those are the kind of things that give a project its kind of character at the end of the day. So in in conceptual design, we may initiate we'll do massing studies in 3D and perspective view right from the beginning. And a typical normal size house, maybe 5 to 10,000 square feet, we might generate half dozen or dozen schemes in the beginning, just constantly testing and refining options, and trying to create an understanding of what's possible given the constraints. Again, I'm a big believer in designing from perspective too. I used to really be fascinated by architects like Alvaro Siza from Portugal, who seems to design from perspective. He used to make these incredible, elegant sketches, right? And now, of course, we've kind of transitioned to the computer, which is an amazing tool, but we can be designing as if we're experiencing the home almost cinematically, right?
Yeah.
So we're trying to understand how the home is relating to the occupants from the day one, So you're doing that in one hand, and the other hand, you're working on plans and making sure that the plans all work and they flow right. And at the end of the day, it comes together. I often say that the design process, for me, is like a spiral. And the goal is in the middle, right? But it's never a direct path to that solution, and you can see it there, but you're not going straight towards it. You're kind of moving around it, and eventually, hopefully, you find it. But it really is a process of big sort of macro level decisions in the beginning and constant refinement as you get into more development.
The spiral is a really, really good analogy. I've always thought about it as a not linear line. So if you imagine a line going straight left to right, it's not that. I always imagine it being in loops, but the spiral is actually even better because you start big and you focus toward down this, or up or down, wherever, toward this point.
Exactly.
I really like what you said, and I agree with it. I'm very excited to hear it. I think one of the things that we were talking about the other day that maybe a lot of non-architects, let's say clients, don't quite understand about architects is that, well, first of all, generally an architecture office will have a particular type of architecture lane to stay in, whether it be traditional, or modern, as say kind of two extremes or two ways of describing it. But within that kind of direction, the architect, or for myself at least, at the beginning, and even at the end, I don't really care what the building looks like, which is a strange thing to say. Like, I'm more concerned with the ideas of the projects, and then once we've figured those out through the massing and things you described, the building ends up being what it's going to be, and it'll look good because we'll make sure it looks good. But it's interesting because I find clients at the very beginning are more concerned with how it's going to look in the end. But architects are like, but don't worry about that. Don't worry about what it looks like in the end. And that's a weird thing, right? It's a weird thing.
It's really weird, and it's something that happens from time to time at the beginning of a project. It always makes me nervous when a client comes to an initial meeting with a lot of Pinterest images of what they want in the project, and then oftentimes they're from all different kinds of projects and looks, and there's like, how am I going to take these 75 images or whatever it is and make a single project out of it's going to be a hot mess typically. So I think Pinterest has been one of those sort of tools that hasn't been all that helpful on that level, although we certainly, sometimes we do get into Pinterest for research purposes and stuff like that, or to kind of figure out a detail. But in the beginning, it's like, I like to maintain an open mind and not be channeled into a certain idea or look as well. And I think that that's something that I've heard recently from a few clients that have hired us, is that there's, still like a diversity to the kind of, I feel like we're operating within a certain style of architecture, but like no two projects are the same yet. And so each project has its own kind of, it's like its own little person, or has its own character, which we try to maintain rather than, coming up with a formula that's going to end up driving the design decisions every time, because then you end up with an output that's pretty much the same over and over again, right? So
I love that description of each house being sort of a person and having its own character. The only productive way of using Pinterest with a client early on that we found is, well, two things. One is to make sure that we're roughly in the same lane, because if I find someone and they send me a bunch of modern farmhouse, I'm like, this is going to be a problem because you're obsessed with this and like pseudo Spanish villa whatever style, and then I'm sorry, I can't help you. And the other two sometimes is more reference images of a complete diversity set to kind of understand their more like their personalities, honestly. Like the way I describe it to them is like, we're going to go on a vacation together, but instead of spending 2 weeks touring the world, we're going to do it super quick, with images, just so I can gauge your reactions and see. Some people do have very weird, inclinations toward things that they love and things that they hate. Like, I hate stripes. I don't like grills, or I don't like blue or whatever. And it's like, okay, well then you don't have to have blue in the project, I guess.
Then we're like, okay, lay down on the sofa. Let's unpack this. Where does it come from?
Here's a blue house, and then they love it.
Exactly. That's a good point.
I was wondering, kind of like jumping back on the design build portion, a little bit related to clients. Do you see clients like strongly, like how do clients react to the office being a design build? Is that something that they often want to hire you guys for, or they're not aware of it, or it's a turn off, or it's a plus? Like how is it perceived from their side?
It's all over the map, and some clients seek us out because of it, and they like, we want to be involved in this process. And interestingly enough, a couple of my repeat clients have been all design build, and so what's been interesting is like having that opportunity to sort of grow and get to know clients a little bit better in design build, because you're a little bit more you see them more, right? And you get to you're wearing two hats. But I think it could go either way. And there's others that it's just from day one we know we're not going to do design build, and I would say that certainly tends to apply to. I'd say like we have a whole bunch of projects, for example, that it's say probably are institutional grade projects, like money managers are involved, and there's a lot of layers and things like that. Those tend to be more of the design build, bid build method, because there's too much risk and too many moving parts for them to become design build, which is great. You sort of get to create these beautiful buildings, but you're not going to be involved with the creation of them on the daily basis, which is okay too. So it just really varies, and that's why I've tried to explain. Oftentimes we'll have if there's somebody looking to hire, so we say we don't have to make that decision on day one either. That decision can be delayed probably till there's like a fork in the documentation process. I'd say probably at the end of DD into CDs, right? Because we do start documenting things differently in CDs if it's design build, bid build versus design build. Yeah, and so, but that gives us a chance to get to know the clients a little bit too, because I think that we can also be a little bit choosy and say, based upon our experience, getting this far, maybe you should go find a builder, or something like that. So that's nice, but to have that sort of fork and that ability to be you sort of diverse in the way you deliver projects too.
So earlier you talked about the how the design build portion of the practice informs the strictly architecture side, with an understanding of how things are put together. I think an understanding probably of just like physics and how things work also. But do you find it's the opposite as well, where the traditional architecture portion, and I know in your office it's not the split, but I'm describing it this way, is also informing the design build side, or challenging it and pushing it in ways?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, even in terms of like, we've been lucky to work with, I'd say, some master builders on some projects, which is also really eye-opening. And like, I think that sort of speaks to the power of specialization to a certain extent too. And you might pick up a trick or see something that this builder is doing. It's like, wow, that's a really great way to execute this. I didn't think of that, that sort of thing, which is great to see, because I'd say we're good builders. There's definitely people that spend a lifetime doing just building at a very high level are going to be better builders than us, right? And so you can approach them with a bit of humility and say, "Oh wow, this is incredible," and learn from that experience. And so in terms of what I think to a certain extent we do pull ideas from pure design projects into our builds too over time. And you certainly, even if it's a constructed project that you didn't build, you're going to be out there for CA and out there for walks and learning from certain techniques and certain things that you tried that you like that you might incorporate into another project. So I do think there is some feedback the other way as well.
It's one of the things, I think one of the appealing things about design build for architects is all the stuff you mentioned, but also it's potential you're making more money because you're also acting as a contractor, and everyone sort of knows that contractors do better than architects generally. So I'm wondering if you found that to be a very important part of the office's operation, or is that not really a factor for you?
I don't think it's as much a factor as I thought it would be. I do think the potential is there to make more money. If everything goes right? And that's the big risk. I actually think as a design architect, if you're able to execute and the fee's good and you're turning over projects, I mean, there's probably just as much potential to be profitable in design, honestly, as there is in construction, because construction can be a real slog, and then you can just really catch up to you. So and I think the nice thing about doing design is that you're sort of in and out most of your fee, probably in the design process, right? You'll have a chunk of fee for CA, but as long as you're managing time really and the client, I think that can be equally profitable with much less risk, right? So I think that's the advantage of that. And also just like, building, you have to carry a fairly heavy, cash sheet just to kind of fund the project. It's very rare that you can actually get forward funding on a construction project. Often from clients, they like to pay when the work's done. So in the meantime, you have to kind of keep the ball rolling. So you have to have enough cash on hand to do that. And that can be a challenge too.
So I'm also curious about the office's growth and evolution during the last, you said 14 or 15 years. You started off as presumably one person, and now you're 20 some odd. It's a big growth. What were some of the challenges with that, and how were those overcome?
I mean, it's a great question. I mean, I think obviously one of the challenges and it is one of the biggest challenges of becoming a bigger architecture firm is people, management of people. I think, and I think being a small 1 or 2 person firm, it's really easy to sort of develop relationships with people and have a certain level of intimacy that it's harder to have when you're a larger firm. And so it's sort of understanding that, the people that you hire, while talented, may have their own sort of goals and needs and expectations that aren't going to be yours, right? So it's like, I just have a certain like nose to the grindstone mentality, or if I'm working some fair amount of nights and weekends if necessary, and that sort of thing, and not everybody shares that sort of ethic to a certain extent anymore. And I think it's also changed, quite frankly. Certainly I think the pandemic kind of changed people's relationships to work in general. I think in a way that like it's hard. And maybe this is a healthy thing too, or a good thing. But I remember before the pandemic, me personally, when I was an intern architect, or coming up and learning architecture, I would love to being in the office late and on Saturdays and that kind of thing. Because honestly, I feel like it makes you better. Like, not to use like a Kobe Bryant mentality, right? But like the more repetitions and the more time you put into the profession, the more you're going to get out of it in a lot of ways. And I think, I still feel like if the expectation is like a base 40-hour work week to create art, it's a real challenge, because I think there's a lot of really magical stuff that happens in that like 50th hour of the week, know? And so sometimes it takes that kind of focus and grind. And so you really have to kind of love the process and love what you're doing and creating in order for it to be something that doesn't kind of wear you out, so I mean, fortunately I love it, and if I have the free time to come in and find that sort of extra overdrive to make a project, I think that's what really makes a difference from a project that's good to a project that's great, is that level of polish and refinement that happens in more work, and I know that's probably these days, maybe it's politically incorrect to talk about.
Now it's political, everything's political.
Well, it's tricky too, because like we've been employees and we also have our own practice now, and I feel like when you're on one side or the other, you kind of really also perceive things very differently, depending on which office you work at, if you're an employee. But when you have your own business, this is the thing that like wakes you up every morning, that you have to maintain. That's going to be the rest of your life, so you have to be dedicated to that, and you're investing yourself so much into it that you're not really counting the hours. And I do agree, like the creative process is not a linear process. It's not something you can put a number of hours on it and expect a good result in the end. If that's the way you approach it, the result is probably not going to be the best.
It's really difficult. Yeah. Have you seen a change over the generation or generations with let's call it work ethic?
I think so. Yeah, I think I have, and I think it did accelerate when we were all working from home. I think that kind of changed things. But I mean, I do remember working really hard, maybe 20 years ago, right when I was starting out, and that being sort of the expectation to a certain extent. Like I used to have a rule that like I would try not to leave my desk until the boss was gone. Sort of like a rule. Like I just wanted to show that I was there for it, right, and hustling and working hard. And I don't see that as much anymore. Like I think that like there's a term that I understand, but I don't necessarily love, like work-life balance, right? Is again, it's like, I mean, it's like it's important for mental health, but I think there are great things that can be accomplished if you just maybe put a little bit more of the emphasis on the work, or you find a way to make work and life and together as part of an experience that doesn't need to be. It's not a scale, right? Like they can rise together, in terms of the way that you're working and living too. And so,
and I think also that the work-life balance is probably different for everybody. Like finding that right balance is a personal thing. Are you
guys remote, hybrid, all in office?
Mm-hmm. We're hybrid right now. We're not quite all in office yet. I think right now we're everybody can take 1 day a week at their discretion at home, and we've been slowly transitioning from. Obviously, we were fully remote for a long time, and then we went 2 days a week, 3 days a week, and 4 days a week in, and so now we're doing 1 day out. But I really feel like, especially for younger architects, that the benefit of being in the office has been really notable because of the you just being around your peers and listening to them talk, and maybe you pick up a phone conversation. From somebody next to you, you have a conversation about detailing or something like that. I think there's so much more learning and progression happening when people are together in the sort of hive mind than there is at home. Like, I think it's quite easy for somebody to become a little bit lost at home, right? And you may not hear from them for days, right? You're like, well,
are you working? What's happening?
Yeah, exactly. Everyone, what's going on?
And they're like, oh, look, I drew a circle. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, exactly. And here I can stop, like, because we all have everybody is in the same room, and so, I can, even just walking to the conference room here, I might see something on somebody's monitor, and it gives me a chance to actually stop in and say hi and say, oh, this looks right, or this looks wrong, or to make sort of more appropriate corrections in a timely manner too, versus something that's working at home that you might not be able to drop in on as easily, right? And so I think that does help too. It makes it more efficient, because we're also trying to create a culture here. For a long time we were doing this thing called Creative Fridays, which we're bringing back again, and we've been doing some sort of almost like fun activities at the end of the day, sometimes like happy hours where we solve puzzles. But Creative Friday was great. Like, I think some of our most successful ones were like, we did origami for a few hours one afternoon, or we did gingerbread house competition one time, that sort of thing, just to kind of create a culture that's a little bit like, it's creative, but it's not necessarily doing our jobs, and gives everybody a chance to kind of get to know each other in a collaborative way too, which I think is really important. I think certainly, like, especially if you're expecting people to work hard, then there should be some return, right? I think there should be some fun and some team building and culture creation too, or else it doesn't work, so.
So for the gingerbread, did you guys do 3D models before cutting it?
No, it was all ad hoc. I think
that'd be cheating, is what that'd be. What are you doing over there? Nothing. You laser cutting your gingerbread?
We did the Salk Institute. I think it was a really easy one to do.
Oh, cool.
Because just lots of planes, right? You don't want to do anything too.
Yeah.
No Zaha.
You don't want to do Zaha D.
Yeah, exactly. No.
Yeah. That's amazing. I tend to agree with everything you've said in this last bit about kind of the work cultures for sure, and the dedication it takes. It's really tough, and I think sometimes the work-life balance mentality makes sense, but it also positions it sort of incorrectly, because for some, I think the other thing too is for any employer, you're trying to find people who are in line with you, and in line means many things. Alignment in terms of the pay, the type of work, the office culture, the personality, all this stuff. But it also means how they view the profession and the work relative to themselves. And some folks, it is a 9 to 6, 9 to 5 mentality, and then they go home, and then their life is afterwards, and that's fine. Other folks, so like architecture, that is their life. And you don't want anyone burning out, but for them, like, they feel like I was put on this planet to design cool stuff and to work through these problems. And for myself, at least, I tend to find myself more aligned with that mentality. And by the way, also, I love what you said about putting in the time. It makes a difference over longer periods. And I think it's true. That's one of the things I've always loved about, even when I was an architecture student, I felt like if I can just put in more time, I mean, you don't want to be wasting time, but if you put more time at your desk, it's kind of like money in the bank. It does make a difference over the course of 5 years as a student, or then 10 years as a professional.
Absolutely does. You'll develop faster, and they say, there's that saying, I think it was 10,000 hours till you master whatever you're doing, your profession, right? So the more hours you get in, or the more time involved in your creation of your art, it will reap the benefits. There's going to be, say you're working 10% more, you're going to be 10% improved in that process. So I think it comes to that sort of, what you want to do in life. But if you feel like you have a calling to create, like, and I definitely feel like that's something that gives me great joy, and I really enjoy doing, is this act of creation and making. You really want every project that we do to become like considered almost like a work of art that people live in. And I really believe now that you can kind of see the falling of organized religion to a certain extent, right, in the country, in the world even. But I feel now like our homes have become our spiritual places to a certain extent. It's where you like design and architecture is a spiritual thing. And so wanting to tap into that and really heighten people's experiences and, allowing them to live in these really these spiritual sanctuaries that they live in and create the sort of moments of daily beauty and enjoyment and really change the experience of their lives is really important. And so, but it takes effort and awareness and it takes hours, right? It takes hours of refining and grinding and ripping up drawings and starting over. Sometimes all of that, right? But you always learn from even the parts of the spiral that you're on there. It doesn't seem like you're getting to the middle, right? But you are. So
you are, even if you can't see the dot.
You'll get there.
Where's the dot?
Exactly.
Just keep going up or down the spiral.
And that probably ties in. I know we're coming up on the hour, but that probably ties into. It's funny. Your description on Instagram is, I think it's something like, I'm an artist who makes buildings or something to that effect. I think.
That's exactly.
And I feel like some of what you said this last bit ties to that.
That was a client. I think he just, one day I think we were on the phone. He's like, you're an artist. You're an artist. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting way, I think, also to differentiate yourself, right? You can say, well, that really is a goal, is to create art, livable pieces of art. I mean, obviously they have to be functionally sound and work and everything. And there's also the sense that the home is a machine, right? But really to create those, moments of special beauty and magic too in a project. And so I really wanted that to be kind of also part of a core idea of what differentiates us too, is that sort of creation aspect.
That's awesome. So the final question we always ask is, what is your favorite building? And it doesn't have to be one of your own, although it could be.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's great. Favorite building. I would probably go towards Louis Kahn. I would. Yeah. And I'm torn. Like I was really, we mentioned the Salk. I'm really moved by the Salk Institute and got to go down there and visit a few years ago. And actually got a tour of the insides, which was cool, the labs and stuff. Cool. So that may be it. I mean, the Kimball is also really impressive. So they're actually somewhat similar kind of ideas, right? But so I would lean into Kahn, and let's just say the Kimball, because just the quality of light in that building and the sort of the rational layout and materiality of it is just really, really special. It just sort of glows right when you're there. So
that's perfect. I love that. Yeah. Noah, thank you so much for making the time on an early Friday morning to do this recording.
Thank you, David.
It was so much fun. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Marina. It was great talking to you both.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to this week's episode. If you like what we're doing, then please support the show by leaving a review of it in the Apple Podcast app. You can also find the show on Spotify and YouTube, where you can subscribe, probably rate or comment and share and all that kind of stuff. Right?
Yeah, that you can do out there. If you want to reach out to us, you can also send a text message or call our hotline, 213-222-6950. If you have guest suggestions, topics you want to talk about, questions, things you want to ask, shoot it our way.
Yes, and you can also find us on Instagram, where we are very active. We post about once a day, I think, with clips, reels, work images, quotes, all kinds of fun stuff. And we have a website, which is secondstudiopod.com, where you can find all 400 and something episodes with articles, bios, images. Everything you want is on there. And all the episodes are categorized very neatly for you. So if you want to see interviews, you can see interviews. If you want to see, if you want to listen to recordings about architecture and design, and you can do that. What else is on there? If you want to hear,
just go on there and
what it's like to be us and go to Trader Joe's, you can listen to that. That's it for now. Thanks everyone for listening. More to come soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.